Today we're out here in Southern California taking a look at the 2018 Acura RLX, the Acura brand's flagship sedan. Although the basics of the RLX started out in 2014, 2018 brings us a significant refresh. We get all new sheet metal right from this point forward in the vehicle. That means we get an all new bumper, all new headlamps, all new hood, etc., and we get an all new rear end as well. Aside from the new looks, the big change for the 2018 RLX is that they have decided to coalesce things into just two trims. We have the RLX front-wheel drive model, which has a regular naturally aspirated V6 engine, their all-new 10-speed automatic transmission, and then the RLX hybrid that we're looking at right here. This is the range-topping model, and this is the second trim of the RLX. The RLX hybrid, of course, isn't new, but it has been tweaked for 2018, and the biggest tweak, perhaps, is the price tag, because this is now about $4,000 less expensive than the 2017 RLX hybrid at $62,865. Obviously, the biggest visual change for the RLX is the all-new Acura grille that we also see in the MDX and the TLX. This is a pretty sharp departure from the sort of shield or beak look that we've seen in Acuras before, and I really like the way this grille looks. We have this very large Acura logo up front because this hides a radar cruise control sensor. Acura has made their Acura Watch suite of safety systems standard on all RLX models. That includes radar adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assistance, road departure mitigation, their autonomous braking system called collision mitigating braking, and of course the all-new Acura traffic jam assist, which will provide steering effort for you in low-speed situations. In the previous generation of the RLX and most other Acura products, the steering assist only happens above about 40 miles an hour. This one will actually keep you centered in your lane in low-speed crawl situations. Acura has also gone all in on LEDs, so these are full LED headlamps. You'll notice that we have a daytime running lamp strip and accent strip inside the headlamp module. You'll see it right over there on that side as well. And then a separate turn signal strip inside there made out of amber LEDs. On each side, we find 8 LED modules that provide the low beams for the car, and then an additional 2 LED modules on each side that provide the high beams. We also have LED fog lamps down here at the bottom of the bumper. A number of you have asked me where the RLX fits in the luxury vehicle landscape, so let's try and cover that now. At 196.1 inches long, this is about 1 inch longer than a BMW 5 Series, about 4 inches longer than a Lexus GS. That means this is very solidly a mid-size luxury sedan in America. This is roughly the same size as the Infiniti Q70, and it's a little bit smaller than the 2018 Volvo S90 because the S90 got considerably larger this year. Like every Acura vehicle in the United States except for the NSX, we find a transverse engine up front, front-wheel drive in the base model, all-wheel drive optional. Of course, comparisons between other vehicles and the RLX hybrid are pretty tricky because there really are not very many hybrids in this particular segment. We have the recently reviewed BMW 530e, but that's a plug-in hybrid. We have the Volvo S90 T8, again, that's a plug-in hybrid. We have the Lexus GS hybrid, which is a traditional hybrid, and the Infiniti Q70 hybrid, but for some reason, both of those models are not offered with all-wheel drive. It's a little bit hard to see because it is such a bright day out here, but we get new tail lamp modules for 2018 as well. These really are kind of an interesting design. They are all LEDs, so we get LED turn signals, LED backup lights, LED accent strips, and LED brake lights as well. As you can see on the other side of your screen, the turn signal is an amber T section right over here on the side, and then we get this swoop down below. The brake lights would be right over here on the body, then we get these accent strips that run over to the trunk. All models, including the hybrid, get well-integrated dual exhaust tips at the bottom of the bumper. Under the hood, we find the same engines as last year, but there are some tweaks to the rest of the vehicle systems. Things start out with a 3.5-liter V6 engine producing 310 horsepower and 272 pound-feet of torque, but instead of a 6-speed automatic, we now find the brand new 10-speed automatic under the hood. The 10-speed automatic sends power to the front wheels only because there is no traditional mechanical all-wheel drive system offered in the RLX. Then we have the hybrid model that we're driving right here. That combines basically the same V6 engine with a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission and 3 electric motors. The first electric motor is mounted right there by the engine, between the engine and the transmission. It gives us 47 horsepower. Then we have twin 36 horsepower electric motors on the rear of the vehicle. Because gasoline engines and electric motors don't produce their peak horsepower and torque at the same time, the total comes in at 377 horsepower and 341 pound-feet of torque. If the twin 36 horsepower electric axle sounds familiar, that's because Acura uses it in a variety of different vehicles. It actually launched in the hybrid RLX back in about 2015, but we also see it in the front of the Acura NSX supercar and of course the back of the Acura MDX hybrid. The electric all-wheel drive system is one of the things that separates the RLX hybrid from something like a Q70 hybrid or a Lexus GS450 hybrid, because those vehicles don't have all-wheel drive available at all. But this is a little bit different than something like a BMW 530e, not just because this is not a plug-in hybrid, but because that uses a mechanical all-wheel drive system. Instead of using a mechanical super handling all-wheel drive system like we find in the Acura TLX or in the regular Acura MDX, we have an electric system. So this system can balance power approximately 300 horsepower up front, about 72 horsepower to the rear axle, and that is quite different than the TLX or the MDX. Because the mechanical Acura super handling all-wheel drive system can send up to 90% of vehicle power to the rear axle, assuming no wheel slip. This system is thematically very similar to the Volvo S90 plug-in hybrid system because that system gives us 400 horsepower total, about 320 up front and about 80 in the back. Although thematically similar to Volvo's plug-in hybrid system, there is a key difference in the Acura hybrid system. Instead of using a single electric motor for the rear axle, they decided to use a twin motor unit. This twin motor unit uses two 36 horsepower electric motors, and it can either couple them together to give us equal power across the rear axle, or it can decouple them to power just one rear wheel whenever it wants to. That gives the RLX's rear axle a torque vectoring capability that we don't find in the Volvo system. In addition to powering one rear wheel alone, the system can also use the other rear wheel to generate power. So it can actually regenerative brake or drag one wheel, use that power, shift it over to the other side, and then power the other wheel. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the drive section, but the key takeaway here is that the torque vectoring ability of this rear axle is not limited to power-on situations. It also works in neutral handling situations. So if you're just going around a corner, your foot's not on the gas, this rear axle is still trying to torque vector for you. Front seat comfort has improved for 2018, although I am still going to have to give this 7 out of 10 points in our front seat comfort index. The reason for that, of course, is that the luxury mid-size sedan segment is full of some truly comfortable seats. We have multi-contour seats from BMW, Volvo's latest seat design in the S90, and of course Mercedes' latest seat design in the E-Class as well. Although it may sound like 7 out of 10 points is a bad score for this segment, again, keep in mind that this segment is full of very, very comfortable seats, and these seats are about the same as what we find in most models of the BMW 5 Series, Audi A6, and the Mercedes-Benz E-Class. I'm going to give rear seat room 9 out of 10 points. The amount of legroom that we find in the RLX really is enormous, and that's all thanks to the transverse engine design that we find in this vehicle. With this front seat easily adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you'll notice I have 7 or 8 inches of legroom left. This is a massive amount of legroom compared to a 5 Series or an E-Class or an Audi A6. Something like a Volvo S90 would give you more legroom than this, but it's a significantly bigger vehicle because it's been stretched to over 200 inches for the 2018 model year. It's really noticeable if I move all the way over to the right side of this car. This front seat was all the way back in its tracks. I still have several inches of legroom left. The other thing you'll notice is that we have large and accommodating footwells back here also. The BMW 5 Series has a decent amount of legroom in the rear, not as much as we see here, but the rear footwells are very, very tight. It makes it hard to get in and out of the back of that vehicle. If I move over to the middle seat, you'll definitely notice that this rear end is designed more for 2 passengers than 3 because these are more bucket-shaped outboard seats. I do have to crane my head to one side in order to fit back here, and we have a reasonable hump even though we don't have a traditional all-wheel drive system. Cargo capacity comes in a little bit behind some of the other entries in this segment. We find just over 14 cubic feet of storage space in the non-hybrid model, just over 12 in this hybrid model. That puts the RLX below things like the BMW 5 Series, but pretty similar to the Volvo S90 in the non-hybrid form. If we lift up the cargo area load floor, we find some additional storage space rather than a spare tire, although we do have this can of fix-a-flat here. The cargo area of the RLX is quite deep, and it is also very square, as you'll see here, and that's because the battery is placed right back here against the rear seats. Now on the downside, that means we do not get a trunk pass-through. On the flip side, the squareness of the cargo area makes it very practical as far as putting large roller bags inside, and you do have a little bit of access to the area above the battery, you can see right there, although there is also a warning label telling you not to put anything heavy in this tier. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are driving the top-end hybrid trim, so we do have a few things in here that we don't see in the regular model. The driver and front passenger have height adjustable shoulder belts. We have two-way adjustable headrests and a fairly distinctive seat design as well. The leather upholstery is perforated because the front seats are both heated and ventilated. The outboard seating positions in the rear are also heated. If we move on over to the front door, we find all soft touch plastics, as you'd expect in a vehicle in this price category. We also find the same level of attention to detail in the rear doors. One thing worth noting is that unlike the new Acura MDX, we for some reason still do not find real wood trim inside the RLX. The dashboard is made from a combination of injection molded soft touch plastics like this dark section above and stitched materials like this lighter section below. We have two large air vents right there, more of that imitation wood trim, and then a large bin and slot style glove compartment. Unfortunately, Acura did not update the infotainment and navigation system for 2018. That means that we do not see the newer infotainment system that we see in the 2018 Acura MDX. This is still basically the same system that we saw in the 2017 RLX. The two screens work in conjunction with one another and the control knob that's lower on the dashboard. When you're entering an address into the system, for instance, you can either use this scroll wheel and knob arrangement, or you can actually type it into this touchscreen. Below that touchscreen, we have the physical controls for the dual zone climate control system. Again, those physical controls for the infotainment system with some direct access buttons right across the top. And then we have the controls for the heated and ventilated seats. There's a small storage cubby right here where you can put very small knickknacks and a 12-volt power port. And then behind that, we have the Acura shifter that we see in a variety of different Acura models. This is a button arrangement where we have park, drive, neutral, and reverse. We pull backwards for reverse right there. Behind the shifter, we find the sport drive mode button, the electric parking brake, and an electronic brake hold. And then over here behind this cover, we have two very large cup holders. The leather-wrapped center console opens from either side to reveal a large storage compartment for a luxury vehicle. Most luxury cars have a drive shaft down there, and that does take up some of that storage room, but since we don't have one in the RLX, we get a larger storage cubby. This is also where you'll find the USB input, auxiliary input, and another 12-volt power port. Keeping things fairly traditional, we have an analog instrument cluster with two large dials for the speedometer and tachometer, and then smaller needles for the battery level over here on the left and the fuel level over here on the right. In the middle of everything, we have a color multifunction display. The multifunction display gives us things like our trip computer information and the readouts of the active safety systems we have in the vehicle, lane keeping assistance systems, radar adaptive cruise control, etc. Moving out from there, we find the familiar Acura 3-spoke steering wheel. We have buttons on the bottom for the heated steering wheel function, lane keeping assistance, radar cruise control, follow distance, and then on the left side we have the buttons for the infotainment system. Volume up, down, mute, track, forward, backward, source button, voice command button, and then of course dedicated phone buttons as well. On the right side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system. Out on the road, the first thing you'll notice about the RLX is that this is smoother than the last generation RLX hybrid, even though the basics of the system are the same. Honda has not just given us a new battery pack in the rear, but they have also tweaked the software overall to help make sure this is a little bit smoother than in the past. But the key thing to know is that this still uses a 7-speed dual clutch transmission, not a continuously variable transmission like we find under the hood of the GS450. This hybrid system is not going to be as smooth as the hybrid system that we find in the Lexus, but it is going to be a lot more engaging. This hybrid system is also notably more powerful, and that's how the RLX scoots from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds flat. That's a little bit faster than the last RLX hybrid that we tested, and about a full second faster than the Lexus GS hybrid or the BMW 530e. This is a little bit slower than the Volvo S90 hybrid because that system does give us 400 horsepower and a massive amount more torque, but it is also going to be more expensive. In our braking test, we stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 125 feet. That is a little bit long for this particular segment. However, it likely has to do with the added weight of the hybrid system and the fact that we have all-season tires on this particular model. When it comes to handling, the hybrid RLX and the regular RLX drive quite differently. The regular RLX, the non-hybrid model, is of course a front-wheel drive vehicle. It has over 300 horsepower up front, so there is a little bit of torque steer going on in that vehicle, but it has an all-wheel steering system, and that really helps make it feel more nimble than the average front-wheel drive vehicle out on winding mountain roads. That's really going to be obvious if you drive the regular RLX back-to-back with something like a Lexus ES. The Lexus ES is not going to be nearly as dynamic as the RLX. The difference between the front-wheel drive RLX and the all-wheel drive RLX is not as big as it is between the front-wheel drive TLX and the all-wheel drive TLX, because of course this does not have a mechanical all-wheel drive system. So while the TLX can send 90% of engine power to the rear axle under certain circumstances when it wants to, this vehicle never can. And that means that if we find ourselves in sweeping corners like this and we start pushing the throttle a little bit harder, we get a little bit more torque steer in the RLX than we find in the TLX. But it is very, very well controlled. It's actually better controlled than in the Volvo S90 plug-in hybrid. A lot of that has to do with the torque vectoring ability of the rear axle. Again, this axle does more than just direct power across the rear axle. So my foot is off the gas right now and we're going around this corner. It's actually using one motor to regenerate power and drive it to the other wheel to give us neutral handling torque vectoring. That helps compensate for the added weight that we find in the RLX hybrid. When it comes to our overall handling score, I'm going to give this an A-, and that's largely down to the stock tire choice. You could really improve the handling in this model if you were to give this grippier tires when you bought one. Although certain versions of the S90 or the A6 will handle better than the RLX, you aren't going to be able to put a torque vectoring rear axle in those aftermarket as easily as you would be able to swap tires in the RLX and really improve the handling of this vehicle. On the other side of things, if you're trying to compare the RLX to something like a Kia Cadenza or a Lexus ES or perhaps a Buick, then this is definitely going to give you superior handling performance out on the road and superior feel. This is an awful lot more engaging than those other vehicles, and you really can thank that torque vectoring electric rear axle. At this point in time, the RLX does not come with an active damper system. Instead, Acura gives us what they call a two-mode damper. Basically, it's a traditional damper that has a large valve and a small valve inside the damper unit that allows the suspension to react a little bit differently when it encounters a large bump or a soft bump. This is something that we've seen from Acura for a while, and the system does work fairly well, although the RLX is overall a little bit softer than some of the sporty options in this segment. I think it overall fits the character of the vehicle, however. It also helps us get an A+ when it comes to the overall ride score. This is definitely going to be very comfortable for a long highway trip, easily the equal of something like the Lexus ES. But thanks to the two-mode damper system, we do get a little bit more feedback from the front tires than we find in the Lexus. That's also helped out by the fact that this has a double wishbone suspension up front. That's something that we generally only find in more expensive luxury vehicles. We find it in the RLX, we find it in the S90, but we do not find it in the TLX or in the Lexus ES, for instance. This front suspension design allows the front tires to have more constant contact with the ground, and it also aligns the steering axis and the suspension axis that helps reduce torque steer overall. Although we don't have official numbers from our own home test course, we did score a very quiet 68 decibels out here in Malibu, California at 50 miles an hour. That easily makes this one of the quietest mid-sized luxury sedans available. Fuel economy has of course been a little bit difficult to gauge during our time with this vehicle, but 30 miles per gallon wouldn't be unreasonable on average. The RLX spends a reasonable amount of time in its electric-only operation, very similar to what we see in the Lexus GS, but this is not going to spend as much time in its electric-only mode as the plug-in hybrid options in this segment, like the BMW or the Volvo. Although the mid-size luxury sedan segment is more crowded than ever before, the RLX makes a pretty good argument for itself. It's reliable, it's comfortable, it's definitely quick 0 to 60, and we get excellent fuel economy out of the hybrid system. We also have Acura's latest safety systems, including their low-speed follow system with the steering assistance. That helps reduce driver fatigue in stop-and-go situations because it'll provide the majority of the effort to keep you centered in your lane if you're on a freeway in stop-and-go traffic. The RLX Hybrid also has an eagerness that we don't see in all of the luxury competition at the same price. Obviously, you can get much more powerful BMW or Mercedes or Audi models, but those are going to be much more expensive than what we see here in the RLX, and comparably priced, this is going to feel more engaging and more eager than many of those other options. Acura has drastically simplified their pricing lineup for 2018. There are really just two different RLXs and no real options to choose from other than paint colors, interior colors, etc. Things start out just under $56,000 for the non-hybrid model and just under $63,000 for the sport hybrid that we're driving right here. Keep in mind again that the base model does not come with Acura's all-wheel drive system, although it does get the rear wheel steering system. If you want to get your hands on one, they are available at dealers right now. However, you may have to wait a while in order to get one the exact color that you're after. You will, of course, have to wait until we can get our hands on the RLX Sport Hybrid for a complete week in order to get our complete rundown of comparisons, but overall it does well for itself when you compare comparably priced alternatives. This is relatively similar in size to the GS450H, but we get more power, we get a faster 0 to 60 acceleration time, and of course we get the electric all-wheel drive system. The BMW 530e is not quite the same beast. It's a plug-in hybrid, it's less powerful, it's slower than this, but it is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, and it has a mechanical all-wheel drive system available as well. Obviously, if you start adding options to your 530e, it will get considerably more expensive than the RLX, and we don't find the same kind of standard feature content in that BMW as we do in the Acura. But again, more luxury features are available. The Q70 Hybrid is also a performance-oriented hybrid, and 0 to 60 performance is quite similar to the RLX Hybrid, although for some reason we can't get the Infiniti all-wheel drive system in that particular hybrid vehicle. And lastly, of course, we have the Volvo S90. I think the Volvo S90 is a little bit more attractive inside and outside. It's more of a traditional luxury-shaped and styled vehicle. It has a more sedate front end. It's not as bold as we find in the RLX, but the interior feels more modern. That's logical because, of course, the S90 is newer overall than the basics of the RLX. However, you're going to pay more for the S90 T8 than you will for the RLX Hybrid. Acura has always marched to a slightly different drummer than some of the competition, and that's definitely true for the 2018 RLX. Acura has decided to go all in on active safety systems and all in on value, giving us really just two different RLXs to choose from. Obviously, if you're looking for the ultimate in rear-wheel drive performance dynamics, the RLX is not going to be the option for you. Also, if you're looking for the latest in infotainment gadgets, this is probably not going to be the best choice. If, however, you're looking for a solid, reliable, comfortable vehicle that has an awful lot of interior room and traditional luxury comfort values like excellent 0 to 60 performance and that very quiet and isolated cabin, the RLX is definitely a good pick. In fact, I would take this before I bought a Lexus ES Hybrid or a Lexus GS Hybrid. It's also worth giving the RLX a long look if you're taking a look at lightly equipped European competitors, because while you can get a lot of snazzier gadgets in the European competition, and of course you can get an Audi A6 with their Quattro system and their twin-turbo V6, models that are priced like the Acura RLX are not likely to have those features. So if you're shopping in that $55,000 to $60,000 range, definitely put the RLX on your shopping list. That said, of course, I would also put the BMW 530e on your shopping list and the all-new and recently stretched Volvo S90. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes. Be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.